Second Peter. We are in Second Peter. Second Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 1. And it says, "But there were also false prophets in Israel, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will cleverly teach destructive heresies and even deny the master who bought them. In this way they will bring sudden destruction on themselves. Many will follow their evil teaching and shameful immorality, and because of these teachers the way of truth will be slandered. In their greed they will make up clever lies to get a hold of your money." And I know the verse continues, but we're up to 3a this week. So, I only got 2.5 verses in this week. We were looking at, how many verses Jeff could preach in a week. I could do the whole chapter, but it's going to take a little more time. So I figure for Mother's Day, we'll stop after an hour. I know, okay, I can keep going. No, but, false prophets, false teachers. There are people in the church who teach it's something that's not proper. And I think Mark chapter 13, it's not like this surprised Jesus, like, oh no, there's people who show up in the church. But it's always been something. Mark 13, chapter 13, verse 22 says, "For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform signs and wonders so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones. Watch out, I've warned you about this ahead of time." And it was true then. Back in Jesus' time, there were some people who taught and did some things wrong. It's true then in the church. Imposters kind of show up. And just as God's prophets, we talked about last week, they were carried along by the wind. We use the image of a ship being carried along to speak things. There were also false prophets. I don't know where the wind comes from, probably Satan. And it's true now because, you hate to say this because people then there are false teachers out there. Now, it's tough because on the internet, when you go there, there's a lot of people, everyone's a false teacher if they think anything differently than you. But it is true. There are people who are out there who are, deceptive. Now, some of us, does anybody remember the game Mafia? It's kind of a cool game. We used to play it. I did student ministry for a long time. Loved hanging out with kids. But we would use cards. I know for some of you cards are sinful. Sorry. No. But we'd use cards. You'd kind of draw different roles. So there'd be people who'd be townspeople, people who'd be cops, people who would be medics, and people who'd be in the mafia. And then we would put our heads down and we'd mafia wake up and we choose someone to, kill. I know that sounds terrible. I'm talking about killing people and the mafia in church. But, sorry. But those of you who are Italian are offended. But it was, and then everyone have different roles, but they don't know who each other. And it was a fun game because you would try to convince people that you were one of the townspeople. And sometimes I was good at it. Too often I play with people too much to get it, but sometimes I looked like an exasperated town person, but I was really the mafia. And then we killed everyone at the end, and they were like, "What?" And they were kind of frustrated. And there was Among Us. Anyone play Among Us? It was kind of like the online version. I think it was mostly teens playing, but it was sort of that same kind of thing where you try to deceive people into thinking you're one of the good guys, but you're really one of the bad guys. And so, Jesus is saying this, Peter is saying this, there's people who just kind of try to blend in. There's false prophets, and false prophets often, especially in the Old Testament we see that, and I think today too, they tell people what they want to hear, not what God is saying. Because, there is that temptation. Jeremiah, I had a class on Jeremiah. It was wonderful in seminary. I spent so much time in that book. But Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 9 says, Jeremiah speaking, he says, "Do not listen to your false prophets, fortune tellers, interpreters of dreams, mediums, and sorcerers who say, the king of Babylon will not conquer you." And then skipping down to verse 16, "Then I spoke to the priests and people and said, this is what the Lord says. Do not listen to your prophets who claim that soon the gold articles taken from my temple will be returned from Babylon. It is all a lie. Do not listen to them. Surrender to the king of Babylon and you will live. Why would you want this whole city destroyed?" And so if you're being attacked by another kingdom, what do you want to hear? Oh, God's going to prevail. You're going to, and so there were people kind of oh, God's going to triumph here. And Jeremiah was actually listening to God, going, "Hey, judgment's coming. It'll be better if you just kind of surrender. Don't try to have a last standoff here." and just go. And so it's nothing new. They want to say everything was okay when it was judgment. It wasn't, because judgment was coming. It's just a whole lot to unpack if we spent time unpacking all Jeremiah. But point being is sometimes we like to hear what we want to hear, but sometimes it's not what God is saying. And they cleverly teach destructive heresies. Now, heresy is dangerous. False teaching is dangerous because if you're trying to live your life for Jesus, then what the truth is should change how you live your life. But if you're off, we're all off, to be honest, a little bit. Like we don't have it all together. We don't have everything down. There's verses that I've spent 30 years studying the Bible now, and I see differently than I did at 20. So you grow in truth, but when you're a little off, it can be a problem. Now, I've never really sailed. I've been anyone here a sailor, like a sail on a boat? I've been fascinated we had a sailboat as a kid on Moore's Lake, but we never quite figured out how to use it, and then someone stole it and destroyed it. So I didn't get to. But I remember, as a kid, we would, it was really windy, and we managed to hook sails to our sleds. It was really super windy and cold, and it was great. We would fly, but we couldn't control them. We just never quite figured that out. And I've thought about putting it on bikes because, man, sometimes it's so windy in Delaware. I don't know, those of you who don't bike don't understand. Delaware, the wind is in your face all the time. We don't have hills, but the wind is always in your face. It doesn't matter which way you turn. I was in Harrisburg area. I almost brought my bike, but I didn't know where to ride, and I probably wouldn't have had time. But I was like, I don't want to do hills. But I'm like, it can't be any worse than Delaware wind. But if you're sailing, back to sailing. Now, let's say I was trying to leave. We used to live in the Los Angeles area. If I was trying to leave the Los Angeles area and go to Hawaii, I'd get a bearing and I'd set it. Now, if I was 1% off, do you think it would matter? Yeah. Who knows where I'd end up? Probably eaten by sharks. So, you could be a little off over the long haul. If you don't correct, it's going to be a bad thing. Or shooting. So if you're out hunting and you see a deer, and if you're a little off, I don't know, some of you don't know much about hunting, but if you're a little off, there's I call it the pie plate. And some of you hate hunting or you hate this, but I call it the pie plate. If you hit it in the pie plate, you're good. So anywhere in there, you're going to accomplish your purpose. But if you go a little off if you're a little off here, guess where? You're shooting like a tree somewhere, or if you go off a little bit here, you're over the deer, you're under and so there has to be accuracy, there has to be precision. You can't just be like, oh, look, a deer, because you're not going to get it. I mean, so anyway, I was thinking about it. It's like poison. Like if you have arsenic, this is the chemist in me, and I was looking up ppms and everything today, and I was like, okay, I'm spending too much time looking up ppms for arsenic, and then I started wondering, with Google being searched, and I'm waiting for Homeland Security to show up. Why am I wondering? And I was Googling all this stuff. I was like, I'm just going to stop here and Google something biblical, like how to love people better, so they kind of see my search history. But there's a difference, with a little bit of arsenic, and I don't know how much. We'll say 1%. Maybe that's the bad. But if that little bit of arsenic. Kids, you can have a little bit in the water and it won't affect you. It's environmental, on a microscopic, it's not going to kill you. But enough of it, that cool drink of water becomes your last drink, right? And so a little bit of something bad can destroy the good. And so we have to be careful because counterfeit teaching does affect the way you live. Now, counterfeit products, some will just hurt your wallet. Your Rolex may be a Folex. This is my Rolex Submariner. No, I'm kidding. It's, not that. But you can buy watches, and I often when I'm overseas and I'm in an airport, there's all these watches for sale, and I don't know how much they're supposed to cost. I don't know if it's a good price or not, but I kind of always wonder, come on, is it the real thing? Maybe it's a good copy, but it's probably a copy. And there's certain places, I'm not going to name them in town, you can go and there's been some busts where most of their goods were not what they were supposed to be. But if you get a bad watch, maybe, I don't know, maybe you'd miss your bus and then catch a cold and then die. I don't know. But generally, just having a bad watch isn't probably going to ruin your life. It might change the quality of it. Or Uggs are like one of the, they were really popular. Are they still popular? I don't know. I don't really follow women's footwear a lot, but the Uggs were like one of the most popularly faked items for a while. Nikes always, of course, and then I was looking up the kind of the ones that are counterfeited the most now. It's like Michael Kors, Coach, Louis Vuitton bags, which I always carry with me, so I know. I don't know, maybe they might hurt your wallet a little bit, but you paid for something that falls apart because it wasn't the original quality you thought, or maybe hurt your rep because people make fun of you because they know it's fake. I don't know, but it's not a big deal. But there's counterfeits out there. Now, some might lead to your death. There are counterfeit airbags. People kind of took one apart, reverse engineer it. You're replacing your airbag. You think you're good, but instead of just air, you get shards of metal because it wasn't made right coming at you. Google it. It's a problem. I know now you're terrified of your airbags in your car. Sorry. Don't hit things. Maybe they won't go off. Or prescription drugs. I was looking up more counterfeit. People counterfeit prescription drugs because prescriptions, I don't know if you know this, are expensive. And so, unless you're Canadian, no. It's a whole other, we could have that debate later. But, people counterfeit prescription drugs. Now, it's I remember when I used to lift when I was younger, you're kind of always looking for the how you can best increase your performance. And so I tried protein things and all these things when I was young. And then I figured out at some point, I was reading this article, and it was this guy who did a scientific evaluation of all these products that said, this is what's in them. And then he did the evaluation, and almost none of them had what they said in them. And I was like, well, I'm not going to buy that anymore. I'm just going to eat eggs. This message is brought to you by Egg Farmers of Delaware. And so that's why I invented the 12-egg omelet. But, prescription, some of you were like, oh my gosh. Don't worry, I took a few of the yellows out because, But prescription drugs, if you take a fake prescription drug that the stuff's not in it, not a problem maybe. But if you take it and there's something else in it, it can kill you. And so the counterfeit can hurt us. And that's why it's important to have the real thing. And it says, even deny the master who bought them. It sounds kind of crazy to be in a church and deny Jesus. What's the deal with that? But people often use things to their own advantage. And then, even when I think of people who deny Jesus, I think for the Pharisees, they were the really kind of default leaders of Israel, and they really couldn't see him even though he's right in front of them, right? And if you read Mark chapter 3, verse 20, it says, one time Jesus was in the house, and the crowds began to gather again. Soon he and his disciples couldn't even find the time to eat. It's as Jesus starts doing stuff and he's healing people and he's doing miracles, he gets popular. I know for some of us, it's I can't imagine not finding the time to eat, right? I drove, again, I had to go to Harrisburg for a couple days. I was gone this week. And I got a shout out for Harrisburg. Oh, but so I've never had a shout out for Harrisburg. I mean, shout out for Philly, I get. Pittsburgh. Harrisburg's the forgotten city in the middle, but anyway, we got shout outs for Harrisburg. But as we're driving through, some of you saw my post, what do I always find? I make time for, no, not the Starbucks, the Ethiopian food. Coffee's okay, but I make better coffee. But man, there's Ethiopian food there. There's this little restaurant. You should go there. This message also brought to you by Awash Ethiopian food in Lancaster. No, but I stopped there because there's this little place and I always make sure they're open, and I go out of my way to make sure I have Ethiopian food. And then I time my coming back. I'll delay and study someplace if I can go back a little bit later. Because two things. One, I get Ethiopian food, and two, Happy Mother's Day to Denise because I brought her Ethiopian food, and I know the way to a woman's heart is Ethiopian food. or at least for my my wife's heart. But so they're busy; they can't find time to eat, which is hard to understand. But sometimes you're that busy, and so it says when the family heard what was happening, they tried to take him away. He's out of his mind, he said, which is kind of funny to me. It's like the Snickers hangry commercials. That's how I've always picture it. Like, man, he's just hangry. Some of you remember those commercials. They try to take him away. It's kind of like. Some of you anyone have that crazy relative that you're just a little bit embarrassed of? Any of you with that relative right now? No, I'm kidding. Don't raise your hand. But it's kind of that, and so his family's like, oh, oy vey. They're just like, I can't believe it. But the original leaders of the royal who arrived from Jerusalem said, because they're coming to check him out, it says he's possessed by Satan, the prince of demons. That's where he gets his power. His family says it's crazy. Religious people say he's demon possessed. And so there were people who denied Jesus back when he was there. And certainly, if you can deny Jesus to his face, it's no surprise that later the church gets people who come into the church and often teach something that's not true. So they'll bring sudden destruction on themselves. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week is the plan. So we'll explore that segment if you're kind of wondering where to go with that. Verse 2 says, many will follow their evil teaching and shameful immorality. Now, shameful immorality, I didn't check all the different translations because I had all kinds of meetings this week. But there really is, so I don't know if another one brings it out better, but there's the connotation, there's a sexual connotation to the term. And I know, in our culture, we never have any problems with sexuality. Said no one ever. There is, I've told you before, when I watch, TV, I'm always like, there's two things, and one of them is sexuality. Because, sexuality is portrayed on TV is not really our morals. So I'm constantly watching, if we're watching TV with the kids or anything, not our values, because, different view. And a lot of times, I think we're affected by our culture more than we think. Now, for those of you who don't know, or if you're tuning in this week, I grew up here, then we moved around a little bit, Pittsburgh. We moved out to the Los Angeles area. We lived in Pasadena. I often say LA because nobody knows where Pasadena is. We lived near the Rose Bowl, kind of, I could walk down and watch the Rose Bowl parade. We did the first year. I remember it was we didn't even know there was, I was oblivious as a kid what the Rose Bowl was or the parade. But I remember we walked, I know, it's a shame, isn't it? But we walked out, I remember we jumped up in the window frame of a bank, which would probably be a federal offense now. But, and we'd been up all night with teenagers and we're like, oh, there's the Rose Bowl parade. Okay, now we're going to go back to bed because we've been up all night. But, we were kind of there. And, LA culture was very different than Delaware. You probably don't need a PhD to figure that one out, right? Their culture out there is very different than ours. And it was funny because I lived there and I was like, oh my gosh, these people. First time you drive in the lanes 6 lanes, you're like, oh my gosh. The next thing you know, you're out in the left lane, going woohoo, driving faster than you probably should, but you just kind of get used to it. Anyway, so I moved from southern California to northern New England. I moved to Maine. And one day, I know you're thinking that was a little bit of a change. Fortunately, we had LL Bean points and we on our credit card, and we could buy lots of clothing because we needed warmer clothes, which is a whole other story. It's a funny stories I'll tell you later, maybe. But so I moved to Maine, and so I'm driving, and so I remember one day distinctly, I get on I think it was 295. It was the little freeway thing that kind of connects, and I wanted to go down to where I lived because I kind of lived south of Portland. And I get on, and I'm passing everybody. And then I suddenly realized, what the heck am I doing? I live in Maine now. I thought the LA people were crazy in the way they drive, and suddenly I found myself driving the way LA people. And I remember distinctly, I pulled over to the right lane. I'm like, I'm just going to cruise. I'm in Maine now. But because the culture around us often affects us more than we know. And we begin to think, do, and act like the culture around us. And so we have to be careful that the culture we see, that the culture we live in, the culture we might even criticize, doesn't become what's in us. Um, it says, because of these teachers, the way of truth will be slandered. And one of my commentators this week said, Christianity is not so much a set of prepositional truths to be believed as a way of life to be lived, an apprenticing of oneself to Jesus as one's master. It's really, Christianity is living differently, and people from the outside should see what a difference he makes in your life. And it's, it's funny because Christianity is not, you're not made right with God by what you do. It's not, if I live up to all God's rules and I follow all these things, then God accepts me. But God accepts us truly by grace, purely by grace. But then you live differently because of that. If you have this experience of faith, you have this experience with Christ, then what you want to do begins to change. And 1 Peter 4:4 said, if we skip back to the last letter, of course your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things they do, so they slander you. Former friends slander you. And some of you know this because you had a different life, you had different friends, and it's not like you go, okay, I'm a believer now, I will cut off all my friends. And there are churches that teach that. We don't do that. But what happens sometimes is people you hang out with no longer want to hang out with you because you don't plunge into the things they want to plunge into. I distinctly remember, in our days we couldn't text. We had to call your parents' house. But I remember I stopped getting those calls and messages because they're like, they're not interested in God to borrow us, or no, I'm not. And sometimes you might get criticized for it, but Christian values, again, they're often at odds with things. And I think no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things. And ESV says it this way: with respect to this, they're surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery. I love that one. And they malign you, And so it's this, plunging into things that are not good. And it's not that to live the Christian life, you're going to be sinless, but you're going to work on sinning less. And again, it's that two-pedal thing. It's the Holy Spirit working in us, brings us victory over the stuff that we were enslaved to, but we also got to give it our effort too, because there's things we can work on. You don't put yourself in the place you used to put. You make the choice when confronted, and you want to cut off the person who cut you off and throw golf balls out your window at them or anything like that. And some of you aren't that bad, but the rest of us. No, but you make choices as to how you're going to live. Matthew 7:13-14 says you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad. Now, some of you are singing the song. Go ahead and sing it in your head. Some of you aren't. That's good. We're not going to tell you what song we're singing. Its gate is wide for the many who choose that way. But the gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. And I love the movie. What's it called? Facing the Giants. It was like this Christian high school, and it's a good movie. You should watch it. And at one point, the field goal coach is like, he's coaching the guy kicking field goals, and he's like, he said he read this scripture. And he's like, and the road is narrow, so anybody can kick wide left or wide right, but you got to kick right in the middle. And that's how life is. We can go wide left, we could go wide right, but there is this. We have to be focused. So we kick it and split the uprights for Jesus. 2 John 6 says this, love means doing what God has commanded us, and he has commanded us to love one another, just as you heard from the beginning. And so we live differently. We love God. We love people. We live differently. Verse 6 says, in the ESV says, and this is love, that we all walk according to his commandments. And I think that's a great metaphor that we kind of miss here. And that's in the 2 John there. It says, if you're a geeky Greek word guy or gal, it's peripateo. The idea is like to walk, but the Hebrew there is it's halak, meaning your walk. And some of you don't care about peripateo and halak, but that's how I hear the words in my head, and now you do too. But it's really this metaphor for your life, because how you walk, how you live, is different when you follow Jesus. I often, if you see me during the week, I will be limping. I will be, walking a little funny. There's times I've come into the pulpit with a cane, or we don't really have a pulpit, with a music stand. I've come to the music stand with a cane. Anybody remember me coming in with cane some weeks? And you're like, what happened? And I'm like, just my life. Because sometimes I'm at the age now, too, I just wake up with a sprained ankle. And I'm like, I must have had a heck of a dream. I did more in my dream than I did, this week. No, but, so sometimes I'll have an ankle sprain or something. I'll have a foot injury, a pulled hamstring, tight quad, after a heavy leg day. Or we biked one time and we got lost. And so we increased our mileage greatly that day. And there were many Charlie horses to come that night as I was trying to stretch it out. But, I do all these things and it affects the way I walk, visible changes. And so those things, visible changes, commitment to a life of faith in Jesus should change the way we walk. And so there's a difference between knowing the truth and walking in the truth. Because it's easy to kind of intellectually know. So we do need to discern. We want to discern truth from error. But do we live it out? Am I living it? And it's been said the longest distance in the world is from your head to your heart. Anyone ever hear that one? It's a good pastor saying. I think it's also, the longest distance in the world is from your head to your hands and feet. Because, it's from the head. You got to take it to heart, really believe it, know it, want to follow it. But then you have to do it. Your hands do different things when you're following Jesus. Your feet will bring you different places. You will halak differently. You will walk differently when you're believing and following Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 7:24, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows is like a wise person who builds his house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it's built on bedrock. And so we hear the words of Jesus. We follow the words of Jesus. Let's say if you want to read the Sermon on the Mount, we did that series a while ago, but that's a great summation of hey, these are the Jesus things to do. Will we actually do it and live it out? There is this challenge to live differently because we know. Will I put it into practice? I could tell you forever truth, but I have to live it out myself. I could tell you forever truth, but you have to decide, am I going to live this out, or is it just going to be something I do on Sunday? Because we're also good at that, right? Like, I walk well on Sunday, but Monday we forget about Jesus. Until my fill up the next week. It says, greed, kind of go back to the verse we're in, is greed, tell clever lies to get your money. That's never been a problem in the church, right? Said no honest preacher ever. Because, honestly, if I were in this to make money, there's a lot of different things I would do. One was be not in this, but but there are there are better ways to make money. But there are people who kind of will prey on it. Now, I'm not going to condemn everyone on TV. But you probably will see the ones who want the money. They're on TV, and they're begging you for money, and they're sending you the form letter with your name in it that you're thinking, oh, they really care about me. This says Jeffrey. It's misspelled, but it's Jeffrey. And there's the people who they'll prey on that. And I've certainly known more than a few people who give away all their money to somebody. And unfortunately, sometimes I know, well, that person lives in a mansion. Well, you living in a shack, and I don't think a lot of the money is going to help people like they say. There was one pastor, I was infuriated. He flew into a poor country, took an offering, and flew out in Africa. And I was like, oh my gosh. If you fly your private jet into a poor African country, you better be there to bless some people. Can I get an amen? Or any poor country. But sometimes greed takes over in people, right? Colossians 3:5 says, so put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Let's take that for everyone, because we all got some of that stuff lurking in us. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. So don't be greedy or indolent. We're made to worship. We're made to have this relationship with God. That's why Jesus comes, to restore that relationship. But, we're made to worship, but it's easy to worship money. Now, you might not think, oh, yeah, I put my money in a big stack, and I'm like, ooh, shakalaka, I love my money. But it's easy to order our life in the pursuit of that at the cost of everything else. Money is not in of itself evil. It's the love of money. And the problem is we often take the created things and worship them in place of the Creator. And I think in America it's harder than most because we may not even think we're greedy, but we don't understand how good we got it and how much stuff we got. Some of you have been overseas, you kind of see. And so, where are we seeking our comfort? Because you can be rich and love God. You can be poor and love money. It's not even what you have, it's what has you. And I often say, and it's not original to me, do you have money or does your money have you? Because so often when we get obsessed with money, we no longer control it. It controls us. It controls the way we live. All our decisions are based on money, 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 instead of, hey, what does God want me to do with this money? In our culture, I've said, I mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to bring it out here. Our culture, I think, treats two things. It treats a lot of things differently than I think it should. But two things in particular in our culture are sex and money. When I watch TV, when I watch a TV show, again, there's lots of things. Don't get me wrong, but those are. I think we treat sexuality in a way that's not honoring to God. And I think we can all agree on that. Has anyone here ever watched a TV show or a movie with a depiction of sexuality in a way that probably is not God honoring? So the rest of you don't watch TV. Okay. You're so holy and lying. And the other thing is money. Because, we often in our culture, we pursue money at all costs. Money's just a tool. It's not a bad thing to have, but, how to use that tool. Like a chainsaw is good. It's a tool. But if you chase people with it through the mall, you're being arrested. If you cut down trees for people whose trees have fallen and they need help getting out of their house, that's a good reason. And so we have to be careful how we use it. NRSV says, for this verse, it says, in their greed they will exploit you. I like that because it's to take advantage of someone by implying what is offered is more valuable than it is. You ever go to a fast food restaurant? The rest of you are gourmets, sorry. The rest of us are, like you see the picture of the meal, or you see it on TV, or you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, I want number one meal. It looks so good. And then you get it. And you're like, I don't know, I've literally been like, did I get the right, is this the sandwich I'm supposed to have? Because it doesn't look like that one. And they're like, yep, that's it. Yep, you've got 2 beef patties in there, and I think there's a speck of bacon. And we smushed it to get it in the box for you. But you know what I mean? Like you feel like you've been exploited. Or when children are little, it's funny because, if my kid, when they were like 2, had a $20 bill, I could be like, here's 6 shiny pennies. Would they trade that for you? Because they think, oh, that's a more value. That's a more worth. And I was reading stories about this, trying to get examples. And 2011, a teenager sold their kidney on the black market so they could buy an iPad. That's a bad decision. I'd give you my old 2011 iPad. But that's, we often trade things we think are of value for things that are really of value. And I'm sure no one's ever ordered something from online and then got it and went, wow, they took my money. I won't mention the website. I'm thinking you're all thinking it right now. But here's the thing. There's this balance then, going back to, heresy, there's heresy, but there's also, when we read the Bible, we're not all going to come to agreement on everything. And I've seen people go too far with this to the point where anytime there's any interpretation slightly different than theirs, heretic! that's probably taking it too far. But we need to be students of the Word. There's a joke. I won't try to tell it in the first person because you guys will see through it with me. But there's, once saw a guy on a bridge about to jump. I said, "Don't do it." He said, "Nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" He's like, "I'm a Christian." "Me too, Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too. What denomination?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." And "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region of 1912? He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council 1912. I said, "Die, heretic," and pushed him over. Because, sometimes, and I think it's gotten better today, maybe not, depends on the circles you run in. Some of you run in circles, you're probably tired. But anyway, it's easy to kind of, and there's this discernment process. We have to figure out what are big issues, what are little issues. Sometimes there's just, we might read scripture slightly different than someone else. We might have differing opinions on things. We had a good discussion of that in men's group this week. Now, either Rupertius Melendus or Marco Antonio Dominus who said this, and I don't know. And a lot of people, it gets, Augustine often gets credit for this saying, but it's unlikely to have been his. It says, "In essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, in all things, charity." And so as much as we want to root out wrong teaching, and we need to look for deceptive teacher in the churches, and we do care about wrong teaching because it often, wrong teaching will lead you to the wrong places. You'll miss Hawaii. You don't want to miss Hawaii. It's beautiful. There's fruit hanging in trees. There's volcanoes, but stay away from those. But they're cool looking. But it's funny because sometimes small issues become big issues and divide the church. Should we sing hymns or modern music? Well, you came here; it's mostly modern. But it's funny. I went to this conference this weekend. It's like an annual meeting. I have a couple. This one's a couple days long, and they kicked it back old school, and it was like music from the 90s and early 2000s. And I was hanging out with my friend Eric. Remember Eric, the Eagles fan I let preach here? He's the only Eagles fan I think I've ever... No. Some of you remember Eric, and Eric's spoken here sometimes. I was hanging out with Eric, and Eric's a little bit younger than me. In fact, we figured out at some point his wife was like a toddler at the church I went to in college. So I would have seen, and nothing makes you feel old than your friend's wife was apparently a toddler. I probably walked by her in the lobby and tried to not step on her, Now she's like a mom with 3 kids and married to my friend Eric. But I was like, "Oh, you don't remember this one, but this was big in the 90s, man." In the church your wife grew up in. And, it was funny because it was like kicking it old school, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I remember this song." And I thought to myself, this must be how older people who grew up on hymns feel when a hymn comes on. And so we argue about that kind of stuff, but that's really, it's not an essential thing. You have to, can Christians dance? Yeah, some can, some can't. Movies, playing cards, makeup, all these things that we tend to do. The essentials of faith are important. The nature of God. Jesus, is the God-man. Jesus died for our sins and resurrected. And it's funny because we often divide over the silliest, smallest things. I often get an email that asks me, what translation we read. 99% of the time, they're asking me if I read the King James. I mean, we could have just opened up with that. And that's fine. Dana reads the King James. Everybody shout out, wave to Dana. Happy Mother's Day, Dana. But, she likes the King James. That's great. I don't. I like it sometimes because, that thou shalt not kill sounds so much better than do not murder. But again, don't murder. That's, or kill. But you can kill to eat, but that's a whole other story. But, we have opinions, we have preferences, And there's some that just are going to be, a lot of, whether you read the NLT or the NIV or the ESV or the KJV, and some of you are all confused by all these V's, but it's all these versions. They're not like different Bibles, they're just different translations. And just like we all use different words to speak, sometimes we like to read different, but they're the basic same meaning. And it's easy to get caught up in little things and divide over those, but we, in essentials, unity. And so we can learn to discern, and this is I think that's the important part about studying the Bible, and that's why we teach through the Bible, because again, it's like a software agreement. You said yes, click yes, I believe in the Bible, but who reads the software agreement? You don't. You just click OK, because you're like, I got time for that. But it's important what's in there, and that's the Bible, and that's why we teach through the Bible. But bottom line is, what you believe about God will change the way you live it, the way you follow Him. And if what you say you believe doesn't change your life, do you really believe it? My friend Jeff, you like any Jeffs, right? My friend Jeff Leake was speaking this weekend, or I call it weekend sometimes when it's in the middle of the week, because my weekend away was, a couple of days away in Harrisburg, which, God's country, right? I know I made fun of it a little bit, but, my friend Jeff from Pittsburgh, only one Pittsburgher today. Western PA not represented, mostly Philly over here. He said something. He was talking about, it made me think. Faith in Jesus will change your eternal destination. It'll change your heart. It'll change your behavior because you'll live differently, and it'll change generations beyond you. He says this quite frequently, not because he doesn't have anything good to say, but it's a great saying. He says, "It's not what you do, but what you set in motion." He uses it in the sense of, planting churches and different things. He's a good church planter, and they planted 31 churches in 31 years or something that and he's a friend, good guy, gives us advice sometimes, even though you don't know who he is. But I was thinking, it's not what you do, but what you set in motion for your life and family. And he was talking about, he had, it was like his grandparents or something, and he was doing something, and he ended up seeing a picture of his grandfather being baptized. And his grandfather was that guy who went into town and fought all the time. He was that guy who they were like, no way that dude's getting saved. And he just walked by a tent meeting one time. Just walked in, went up, got saved, got his heart right with God. And that changed the destination of his whole family. And now it's like all his cousins and aunts and uncles and everybody, he found this picture, they're all getting baptized. And that was this pivotal moment because the whole family's destiny was changed. That grandfather, through God's grace, set in motion a different path for his family. And so what you do will affect generations. Whether you have kids or not kids, or even the people you interact with, it'll change things. Life will look different, and ultimately we'll live differently, and we'll see the results of that. So I encourage you, live differently this week.